just last week on the show, we were talking about the greatest breakups in heavy metal history. Well, for every action, there is a reaction. For every yin, there is a yang. And so this week, we get to talk about one of the greatest comebacks of all time, the reunion of Deep Purple. Next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the best hard rock songs of 1984. We're going to take a look at the top heavy metal songs of 1984. But before we get to that, we're also going to look at one of the biggest events of 1984, that being the reunion of Deep Purple. Now, why was this a big deal? Well, for one thing, we had not heard from Deep Purple in 9 years. And the Mark II edition of the band, which is the band that's reforming here, we had not heard of from in 11 years, over a decade since we'd heard this band. And they were one of the biggest bands on planet Earth when they were around. Back in the early 70s, there was a big three of hard rock and heavy metal: Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, and Deep Purple. So these are like the founding fathers of the hard rock heavy metal movement. Now, true to its name, the Mark II edition of Deep Purple is not the original version of Deep Purple. That came in the late 60s. The Mark I edition was much more pop-oriented. They were still a rock band, but much more commercial. They put out a hit single by the name of Hush, which got them a little bit of notoriety. But the band wanted to go in a little bit of a heavier direction. So they hired singer Ian Gillan and bassist Roger Glover, and this forms the Mark II lineup. Now, this is considered the classic lineup. They put out 4 albums in the early 70s, and probably the 2 greatest Deep Purple albums of all time, Deep Purple in Rock and Machine Head. These albums were off the charts. These albums were very influential in the hard rock and heavy metal communities. Well, that lasted again for 4 albums, but there was kind of some tension between lead singer Ian Gillan and lead guitarist Ritchie Blackmore. So Ian Gillan and Roger Glover came into the band together and left the band together after 4 albums. Thus, Deep Purple Mark III was formed. They were replaced with singer David Coverdale and bassist Glenn Hughes. They put out a couple of pretty good albums in their own right, but Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale were trying to move Deep Purple in a more funky direction, which irritated guitarist Ritchie Blackmore, who then he leaves the band after those 2 albums. Deep Purple sticks around for one more album. They hire American guitarist Tommy Bolin to finish it up, but their one album really didn't, catch on, and the band dissolved. So again, that was like 9 years ago. So what happened with all these band members since then? Well, let's start with Ritchie Blackmore. When Ritchie Blackmore left the band, he started a band by the name of Rainbow. If you're a fan of this channel, you know Rainbow, one of my favorite bands of all time. Basically, as Ritchie Blackmore's getting ready to leave Deep Purple, he discovers the opening band, a band by the name of Elf, led by one infamous singer, Ronnie James Dio, and he basically hires the band Elf to go off and form Rainbow. Now, there's a theme here. Ritchie Blackmore goes through band members like most people go through underwear. Very rapid succession. So if you think about it this way, the first 5 Rainbow albums all have different lineups. Well, lo and behold, their 3rd album, Long Live Rock and Roll, enter bassist Roger Glover. Now, Roger Glover, of course, had left with Ian Gillan and was kind of doing some producing work. One of his more famous roles was he produced the Judas Priest classic Sin After Sin, and really helped Judas Priest, who had had a couple of albums prior to that with very poor production. He kind of brought their sound up uh, at least a couple of notches, if not more. Anyway, he starts doing some production work for Rainbow and just decides to come on and be their bass player. Now David Coverdale, when Deep Purple breaks up, he goes off and forms the band Whitesnake. And David Coverdale, very similar to Ritchie Blackmore, kind of churns through his band members as well. And through the passage of time, he kind of come in and out of the band. Drummer Ian Paice and keyboardist John Lord, they are off with Whitesnake. So that accounts for just about everybody. But Ian Gillan, when he left, he went on to form a couple of bands, the Ian Gillan Band, and then the band simply known as Gillan, before he landed the gig, replacing Ronnie James Dio in Black Sabbath. So Ian Gillan, at this point, was on the Black Sabbath album Born Again. And just to completely throw this whole thing off, Glenn Hughes would later then replace him and be the lead singer for a future Black Sabbath album. Oh, so very confusing. Bottom line is, few of the members from Deep Purple were in Whitesnake, a few of them were in Rainbow, a few of them were in Black Sabbath, but then they decided to get back together again and put out an album by the name of Perfect Strangers. So let's talk about Perfect Strangers, the album. First and foremost, let's talk about the various contributions from the band members themselves. The MVP of this album, and I don't think it's even close, John Lord on the keyboards. Oh my goodness. It starts off right at the beginning track, Knocking at Your Back Door. He provides the backdrop for the eerie, haunting, kind of dreamlike title track, Perfect Strangers. John Lord is excellent. We just got through talking about this just last week. I think a lot of the mid-'80s hard rock and heavy metal keyboard playing was a little bit sus. If you go back in time, I don't think it added a lot to the music. In fact, it kind of mellowed it out, took a lot of the edge off of it. It was pretty basic, and I think gives it a very dated sound. There is an exception to this, and it's right here. John Lord really knew what he was doing with the keyboards, and it just goes to show that a heavy metal band who knows what they're doing with the keyboards can really use them to effect. They do so here beautifully. I would also say Ian Gillan's vocals are excellent on this album. Going back to the last album he did with Black Sabbath, I think there was a lot of screaming on that album, and kind of, Ian Gillan kind of pushing his vocals to 11. Here he kind of brings it back a little bit, and I've always felt that Ian Gillan's vocals are best performed in this little bit back from the edge. He delivers song after song beautifully. Never sounded better than right here. Again, this is a decade after, his prime time. So really good job by Ian Gillan. Roger Glover, of course, laying down great bass licks throughout the album. Ian Paice, the drummer. We don't talk about Ian Paice much, but let me just say, did a special where he is one of the most underrated drummers of the year. I went back through the entire decade of the 70s and was looking at the best drumming performances year by year. And Ian Paice was either the winner that year or so very close to winning. One of the most consistently good drummers in the history of heavy metal, and he's at the top of his game as well on this album. Just an absolute mammoth performance on this album. Now, the one interesting piece of this is that Ritchie Blackmore's guitar work on this album is kind of muted a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit more subtle than what we're used to. Ritchie Blackmore always seemed to be front and center, kind of the key piece to the Deep Purple sound. A lot of long extended guitar solos, lots of guitar intros. In this album, he kind of takes a little bit of a back seat. A lot of the songs are introduced with more of a, again, John Lord intros. Richie Blackmore's playing within the band much more than I think he had done in the past. Now, having said that, he also has some very tasty solos. I really like his solo on Gypsy's Kiss, for instance. Really, the band really sounds great. So, talking about those songs, Knocking at Your Back Door, very good. Uh, Nobody's Home, very good. Perfect Strangers, Nobody's Good. Under the Gun, and A Gypsy's Kiss, two of the better Richie Blackmore songs. This song, top to bottom, an excellent effort. I always, when I talk about albums, I talk about my favorite songs, but I also always mention a song maybe that I didn't care for as much, and this one happens to be Son of Alaric. Deep Purple puts together a 10-minute instrumental at the end of the album. My ADD kicks in on this bad boy. I don't really like 10-minute songs as a whole, and I really don't like 10-minute instrumental songs as a whole. I do get a little bit bored with it. There seems to be a little bit, while the playing on it's fine, it's excellent, some of the best musicians in the world, does seem like a little bit maybe drawn out, where this didn't need to use up the entire 10 minutes. So I think it's a little bit of a weak closer on an otherwise excellent album. So as I said before, this is one of the best Deep Purple albums in all time. I would put it right up there with their iconic In Rock and their iconic Machine Head albums. Probably I would put it in the top 3. Don't know if I'd put it above those two, but definitely right there in the ballpark. Now, unfortunately, as we talk and we laugh about Deep Purple and we talk about this churn of personnel, this lineup would only last for a few more albums before Ian Gillan would once again be kicked out of the band. Once again, Richie Blackmore would quit the band. Ian Gillan would come back in the band. So we were talking about how this is the return of the Mark II album. I think they're right now on Mark IX, if that gives you any indication of how many people have come and gone through the Deep Purple machinery over the years. But let's give them credit. Not only did they come back with a great album, they've actually had more albums since their big comeback than before. So, and I think they put one out. My calendar gets a little shaky, but I think they had an album out just last year. So still putting out good music to this day. So whatever they did back here in 1984, it took, and Deep Purple has stayed with us the entire time. This was big stuff, guys. I can't oversell the fact that this band really was a big deal when they returned. But the question of the day is, were they good enough to make nominees for the best hard rock song of 1984? Let's find out. Before we get to the 5 nominees, I'm going to do something I rarely do on this. I'm going to throw an honorable mention out there. Because this is one of those underground bands that kind of got lost in the shuffle, but I want to put a spotlight on, and that's from the Swedish band 220 Volt. They have a great song, one of my all-time favorite songs, Firefall. If you've never heard 220 Volt, it's the 6th best song of the year. Just missed my top 5, but really go out of your way to find it. It is an excellent song, way ahead of its time. Now, on to the 5 nominees. And sure enough, our first nominee is the band we were just highlighted, Deep Purple, with their song Perfect Strangers. A lot of great songs on this album, but this is by far my favorite. Again, John Lord's keyboards, Richie Blackmore's guitars blend perfectly with that haunting, dreamlike vocals of Ian Gillan. Perfect Strangers, our first nominee. Our second nominee is from the up-and-coming band Dokken and their song, Just Got Lucky. There's like 2 or 3 songs on this album that really were competing hard for the song of the year. Alone Again is very good. There's so many good songs off Tooth and Nail. But Just Got Lucky has to be in here, has to be my favorite. complete with one of the best videos of all time. I had a home video from Dawkins for a long time, and they were always making fun of George Lynch because he does his guitar solo like on this volcano god, George Lynch. So just got lucky. Nominee number 2. Our third nominee comes from the band The Scorpions. Now, this might be a little bit controversial because they have their kind of trademark song in 1984, Rock You Like a Hurricane, and one of their biggest ballads, Still Loving You. But I'm going to go with a deeper track because I think it's absolutely the best song on the entire album. A song called Coming Home, complete with a very sweet kind of intro where you think it's going to be a ballad, but then it really kicks in. I love those type of songs. I love the big crescendo here. Our third nominee, The Scorpions, with Coming Home. Our fourth nominee, Van Halen, Hot for Teacher. The assault of Alex Van Halen's drums to start, the great guitar solos of Eddie Van Halen, and David Lee Roth declaring to the world, I don't feel tardy. This is Van Halen at their bombastic best. The last great song of Van Halen before David Lee Roth departs the band. And finally, our fifth and final nominee, we talked about him a little bit in the video as well. David Coverdale and Whitesnake with their song, Love Ain't No Stranger. Kind of interesting that here, the two kind of roots of Deep Purple, one of those big roots was Whitesnake. It comes in to compete against the band Deep Purple in their big reunion tour. But who's going to come out on top? Tough call this year, but I got to go for Van Halen, Hot for Teacher. The last hurrah of Van Halen is an epic. This song comes on the radio. You always crank it up to 10. This song hasn't lost any of its luster over the years. It is fantastic. 1984 Hard Rock Song of the Year, Hot for Teacher. Now let's talk about the 5 nominees for Best Heavy Metal Song of 1984. For those of you who don't know, Mrs. Metal Dude is also a big fan of heavy metal music. And this year just happens to 3 of the nominees this year are some of Mrs. Metal Dude's favorite songs of all time. So I'm sure she's going to be very interested to see who wins this year. But without further ado, let's talk about our first nominee, Dio, with The Last in Line. I love this style of song from Dio, where he starts off with a nice ballad sound, brings it up to a big earth-shattering crescendo, and then brings in the heavy thunder afterwards. Last in Line is an all-time classic. Our second nominee, Iron Maiden, with their song Power Slave. This is the title track to one of their biggest albums of all time. And not only does it just checks all the boxes, right? I always talk about that Iron Maiden gallop. This song has such a heavy gallop. Steve Harris on the bass is just wailing in the background. Just absolute thunderous riffage going on in this song. But I also love the lyrics of the song and the story behind the song. It goes back into the early days of Egypt when they still have the Pharaoh. They still lift up these pharaohs as godlike people amongst men, but now the Pharaoh's at the end of his days, and he realizes that even though he's all powerful in the eyes of men, he's not all powerful in the eyes of death. And he finds it such a bummer and such a terrible thing that here he is, a slave to the powers of death. Really great song. Our third nominee comes from the great band Judas Priest, the song The Sentinel. Judas Priest has put out probably close to 20 albums. So many great albums, so many great songs, so many great vocal performances by Judas Priest. It might be kind of hard to really say this is the best Judas Priest song of all time, but The Sentinel definitely is in that contender category. one of my all-time favorite Judas Priest songs. Love love the lyrics here. Love the atmosphere of this song. Love Halford's vocals. If you've never heard The Sentinel, because for whatever reason, I've always talked about this with Judas Priest, sometimes they don't push the best songs on their album. This is the best song on the album. Again, it's the best song they put out in a number of years, and they didn't really push it, so it's a bit of a deep track. So if you haven't heard The Sentinel, please do stop what you're doing right now. Even you can take this video off. You can come back later. Go listen to The Sentinel. You'll thank me later. Our fourth nominee is, of course, the great Metallica. And their, I guess, first ballad, Fade to Black. James Hetfield, after the first Metallica album, wasn't really happy with his vocals. Infamously went out and tried to hire John Bush to be the singer. But here it is. John Bush said no, so James Hetfield continues on as his singing role, and thank goodness he did. James Hetfield's voice in this song just is perfection. Kirk Hammett's guitar work, perfection. Of course, again, you got the great Cliff Burton on this song, still with us, Lars Ulrich on this song. This, again, back to, is The Sentinel the best Judas Priest song of all time? Maybe. Is this the best Metallica song of all time? Maybe. Fade to Black is one of those contenders as the all-time greatest Metallica song. Ooh. And there's a lot of great songs off their tremendous album, Ride the Lightning. And finally, Lemmy comes back with a vengeance. Our fifth nominee, Motorhead, Killed by Death. I love this song. I love the silliness of the title. And Lemmy just delivers it with that perfect Lemmy tongue-in-cheek satire that we've all grown to love. Our fifth nominee, Motorhead, Killed by Death. And the winner is... who's going to win the Mrs. Metal Dude sweepstakes for the best song of 1984? Fade to Black, Metallica. When Metallica is on the top of their game, there's not a band around that can compete. But holy cow, does Judas Priest make a run at it. Holy cow, does Dio put a run in it. Iron Maiden, they're at the top of their game. Motorhead comes out of nowhere. They throw a real haymaker. But at the end of the day, in 1984, Metallica all the way. This song, while it's very dark, it sets that just appropriate mood. The guitars, the singing. Again, James Hetfield put so much emotion into this band. I love John Bush. But I got to sit here and tell you, I'm so glad James Hetfield kept this gig because his voice is perfect for Metallica, perfect for this song. The winner, 1984, Heavy Metal Song of the Year, Fade to Black by Metallica. Now, the Grammys that year had an interesting selection for Song of the Year. They went with Tina Turner. What's Love Got to Do with It? You know, this is an okay song. Tina Turner was an okay performer. But this always seemed like it was like a lifetime achievement award. Like Tina Turner had been around for forever, had some tough breaks, had a, terrible ordeal with her ex-husband. And it just seemed like the Grammys were just ready to give Tina Turner an award. This isn't her best work by any means. And it by no means could compete with the great Metallica, Judas Priest, Dio songs of the day. At the end of the day, Tina Turner, God love you, but the best rock song of the year should also go to Metallica, Fade to Black. And that's our show. Now, spoiler alert, next week we're going to be talking about the best heavy metal albums of 1984. You need to tune in to see if Metallica continue on with their reign of terror. They have been dominating instrumentals. They've been dominating Song of the Year. Can they pull off Album of the Year? They've got a pretty good one. Ride the Lightning is going to be up for the award. Let's see if they can do it. And the best way to catch all this content is to subscribe to the channel and get alerts to future content. We all get busy. We all forget about things, and we all know YouTube stops feeding us channels we're interested in for some apparent reason. So you don't want to lose track of this. You want to see who wins the big prize next week. So subscribe, ring the bell, and hey, if you think Metallica is the rightful winner this year, give this a thumbs up. Really appreciate that. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.